Hello, salam, shalom, privyet, aloha, hola, ciao, buna, and bonjour. It's so awesome to be with you again. And I know you're going to be so happy you're joining us today because I have a very special guest. I'm so excited for the conversation we're going to be having, and it's Dorinda Barker. Dorinda is a relationship coach and online dating expert. So welcome again, and please tell us more about who you are and what you do.
My name is Dorinda Barker. As Samia kindly introduced me, I am a relationship coach and online dating expert. I actually started out in the online dating world. And through the years of being on the online dating world and having clients, I've realized it was also about dating and relationships. It wasn't just about getting the dates on online. Because I was teaching people what the right photos were, the bios that were eye-catching, the
Yeah.
responses that were going to get responded back to,
Mhm.
um, all of that. But after you go on the date, after you get the date, after you get the right responses, what do you do after that? And
Right.
it wound up that I started into relationships and helping people through
Yeah.
that. And I just went to a wedding this weekend of a couple that I actually set up.
Aw, that's awesome. And I'm so
Yeah.
glad.
So I can say I have
Yeah.
two weddings under my belt
Nice.
now.
That
But
is
babies and
wonderful.
engagements. So I have those too.
Awesome. Okay. So, I'm so happy to be talking with you because relationships, my gosh, figuring them out is one of the most important things we have to do in our lives.
Oh yeah.
And surprisingly, that's also pretty much where so much of the conflict in our lives comes in from. And so to
Yes.
be talking to a relationship coach, I think is going to provide such amazing value to all of our listeners who are trying to create positive change in their lives and make that change more fun and easy. So tell me more, like what is a big problem that you see uh, your clients dealing with?
I see so much of my clients dealing with when they're dating people.
Mm,
First of all, they're looking at things that should be secondary instead of looking at the things that should be first.
mm,
You should be looking, especially when you're dating. So of course, we're going to look at what the person looks like. We're
right.
going to look at, that's number one. Even though most relationships I know that work out, that's actually has become secondary when people actually take that moment to actually get to know the person,
Mm,
then the looks are secondary to all of that.
mhm.
It really is true, but coming from the online world. But when it comes to certain things, we need to know ourselves first.
Oh, mm,
Honestly, we have to know ourselves when it comes to dating. And if we don't do that, I tell people not to date.
mhm.
Like they shouldn't be dating. They should have a
Yeah,
relationship with themselves first.
yeah,
And then once they do that, then they should date because then they know what they should be looking for. They know what is going to drive them. They know what the similarities that
mm,
they're going to want in someone. You
yeah,
know, yeah.
yeah. You make me think about the specific challenges that young people especially fall into with dating relationships and why for example, teenagers, when they get into
Yeah.
dating relationships, are much more likely to have problems and experience teen dating violence
Yep.
because they haven't figured themselves out. They have limited experience with relationships in
Mhm.
general. And so then you get into this very specific kind of a relationship, which is hard even for adults to figure out and deal with. And
Yes.
oh my gosh, so the situation can get really complex, especially for the young people.
Oh, yeah. And we learn our dating values and how we date and the people that we are attracted to
Mhm.
start when we're in our younger years,
Uh-huh.
our informative, as I say, our informative years.
Yeah.
And you can choose to break your cycle or you can choose to keep going in that cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and when we're younger, I know in our culture, in the Western culture, that we don't teach our younger generations how to date.
Mm.
We don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't teach them this is right, this is wrong. We're also not teaching our children different than the way we were taught.
Yes. And why is that? Because it's, by the way, not just in the Western culture, it's totally a huge issue in my culture as well. And by my culture now, I'm talking about my Indian, Pakistani, and Muslim culture. Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode. Hope you're getting value out of it. For your information, this episode has been sponsored by the Happiness 101 program. Are you a change maker, coach, trainer, or healer? Are chains of fear holding you back from making the impact and income you desire? Using a unique combination of positive psychology and the spiritual wisdom of our most effective change makers, the Happiness 101 program helps you break through your limiting beliefs and manifest the abundance and success you desire with fun and ease. Interested? Book a free Happiness 101 exploration call with me, your happiness expert, Samia Bano. Just use my online calendar link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happens is through generations change. It's
Hmm.
evolution
Yeah.
in the sense of, I'm not talking in like a Christianity or science. It's just evolution of
Yeah.
who we become
Yes.
because each generation changes.
Yes.
And we, but yet the older generation wants to still teach what they know, which
Yeah.
I think is amazing and great. But the world is always changing
Yes.
and the world views are always changing. And we cannot keep the world views out from us. They're going to seep into us and we're going to want to have some of those views
Yeah.
because they sit with us the
Yeah.
right way.
That's right. And I suppose part of it is also that you just can't teach to the next generation what you don't know yourself. And
Exactly.
yeah, and I've seen this a lot because I used to work on a crisis hotline, domestic violence crisis hotline. And you see in families where there's domestic violence, it's oftentimes generational. And
Oh, all the
it's
time.
like and it's generational because like literally the previous generation got into that kind of abusive relationship. They didn't
Yeah.
know how to deal with it, how to help themselves out of it, and so forth. You, as a child, learn to normalize those kinds of
Yeah.
behavior and attitudes. And so then you don't know any better. You don't expect any better in your own relationships. And so then you end up sort of reproducing
Yeah.
the things that you saw happening with your parents and so forth. And it probably the same thing might be true for your parents. And then you pass on that to your children. And it's just a very difficult cycle to break.
Oh, yeah. You learn what you are taught.
Yeah.
And even what you're not, you're what you're taught without even knowing that you're learning. If you get what I'm saying, because nobody
Yes.
teaches someone
Yeah.
to abuse someone,
Mm.
right? No one teaches you to stay in the place that you are. It's a learned behavior. We're
Yeah.
all, in
Yeah.
you have to want to change. But the thing about people a lot of times is, and I say this all the time, people are in their comfort, but
Mhm.
comfort doesn't always have to be good.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Comfort is what you know, and
Right.
comfort is where you're safe.
Yeah.
And just because you're safe doesn't mean it's good for you.
Right. Yeah. And even that sense of safety is very narrow because
Yes.
if you're in an unhealthy relationship, you're feeling safe in a certain context and to a certain extent, but there are other ways in which you're miserable and you're unhappy and you
Yeah.
don't want to be there.
Oh, yeah. And I think people get stuck in relationships just for the sake of relationship.
Yeah.
I
Ah.
don't, yes, they get stuck because they don't want to be alone. They
Mm.
don't, they don't want to be known as a failure. Actually, the bravest thing you could ever do is walk out of a relationship,
Ah, yes.
especially if it is unhealthy. If it is unhealthy, if it is physical, if it's violent in any way, we'll just go violent in any way.
Yeah.
But even if the two of you are just not meant to be, it's to stay for the sake of staying
Yeah.
in today's world is not a good thing. It's really not.
Yeah.
Because I believe that everyone should have whatever their happiness is.
Yeah. Mm.
And whatever your happiness is, and if that's not there, why live a life that you're actually not living?
Yes. And it's not just about today's world either. And this is actually one of the things that I'm really passionate about raising awareness within especially my Muslim community, because in a traditional Muslim context, there is a huge taboo in many Muslim cultures. I mean, Muslims are not all the same. We have actually a lot of diversity. So for sure, there are Muslim cultures, like especially in the Arab world, where they have a pretty cool attitude about divorce and it's fairly normalized. But there are a lot of Muslim cultures, like especially in the traditional Indian Pakistani Muslim culture, where I grew up until I moved to America. Divorce is like a taboo. And
Oh, yeah.
like it's actually considered a really, really bad thing. And so people will suffer through so much but not be willing to break the relationship because they just think it's such a bad thing. But
Yep.
when you actually look at the teachings of Islam, like in the Quran itself, which is our holy scripture, it says the purpose of marriage is so that you can love, be in love and tranquility with each other. Like that
Yep.
is the vision that the Quran teaches us for why it's promoting marriage in the first place.
Yeah.
And so if you are not able to create a relationship where you are able to experience that love and tranquility, I mean, the Quran itself again says it's better to separate and it allows that to happen. And yet people totally ignore that part of the teaching and just focus
Yeah.
on the part where it discourages it in contexts where perhaps people might be inclined to take that decision to separate too prematurely, where maybe they have not put in enough thought or effort into creating the healthy relationship or resolving the conflict.
Oh, yeah. I mean, excuse me, relationships are work. So
Mm-hmm.
if someone says they're supposed to be easy, I will disagree with them, every day. Should it be a job that you love? Yes, automatically. Should it be a job where you know there's going to be some times that you're like, ooh, yes, automatically.
Yeah.
But those times never outweigh the times of we did this together. We built a life together.
Yes.
There is no one in the world I would rather do this with.
Yeah.
We communicate,
Yeah.
which is number one. You have to be able to communicate and be able to do that without having the breakdown of communications.
Yeah.
And but that all stems with having to do the work on yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you have to do the work on yourself
Yeah.
to know if this is the right person. And
That's
if you, yeah,
yeah.
it's
It
it's
goes back
so
to
important.
what you shared earlier when you said you have to know yourself first.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, you have to know yourself first. If you're going into a relationship because the person has money, they have some kind of stature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can go into a laundry list of things,
Yeah.
potential, potential. But if you're looking at all of those things, but you're not looking at how the person makes you feel, you're
Yeah.
not looking at how that person, how you two talk to each other,
Mm-hmm.
how the conversations you have are
Yeah.
not lifting each other up, especially in the hard times.
Mm-hmm.
If they're whatever makes you tick and run
Yeah.
and it's not fulfilling those boxes for
Mhm.
you, then why are you there?
Yeah. I mean, okay, just to play the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
So now I'm channeling some of the things that I've heard and people say who choose to stay even, when they're miserable and they,
Yeah.
my gosh. So something that I've heard a lot of people say is, well, yes, I'm miserable, but it's my purpose. I feel like it's my purpose as the mom or the wife or, the girlfriend to take care of this other person or these other people in my life. And that's my job. And so if that means I have to sacrifice my happiness so that they can be happy and they can thrive in their life, well, then I've done my job and that gives me satisfaction. And, that's for like not only the reason to stay, but it's like my duty to stay.
That I can understand. I definitely understand that. And I know people who have been in 25-year marriages, and then once the kids are grown and out the door, they get divorced because they only stayed for that reason.
Mm,
And to be honest, in the end, the kids already knew that their life wasn't picture perfect. I would say there's a substantial amount of marriages where the kids, I think, probably would have benefited from the parents not being together.
mm,
You
mhm.
know, it's, you
Yeah.
know, and what I'm trying to say here is I'm not saying I'm saying I'm an advocate for divorce because I am not. I'm an advocate for love. I'm an advocate for relationships. I'm an advocate for commitment.
Yes.
But what I'm also an advocate is for both people to really know themselves and
Mm-hmm.
to then come into a relationship, know themselves and love themselves, and then come into the relationship as two people who are full with themselves that
Yes.
then meet and have things in common and the things that matter
Yeah.
instead of one going, oh, he has the things I want to
Yes.
fulfill me. No, you don't go into a relationship having someone else fulfill you. You go into a
Yeah.
relationship because you're already fulfilled.
Yes. Okay. You have to come back to this part about not going into a relationship because you expect someone to fulfill you. But before
Yeah.
we do that, I just want to highlight another really important connection that I just made from a point we made earlier about how, these abusive relationships, when people are stuck in them, it can create that impact of generational trauma,
Yes.
And so if you are staying in an unhealthy relationship because you're concerned about your kids, that's actually very, uh, uh, like you are actually inadvertently doing the opposite of what's the best for your kids.
Oh
Because
yeah.
if you're staying in an unhealthy relationship, you're teaching your kids to do the same,
Exactly.
you know? So it's
Yeah,
not
it's
good for your
dangerous.
kids. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so dangerous for your
Mm,
kids because you're showing your kids that
yeah.
this is okay.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, a majority, of female children
Yeah.
and male children, I'm not going to say, and it could cross over. It could be totally different, but what they see is what they learn, right?
Yes.
So let's say we have, women who are in abusive relationships. Most of these women, a majority of these women who get interviewed
Yeah.
and they talk, how many times have you heard, my father abused my mother, my
Yeah.
grandfather abused my grandmother, or my grandfather abused me, or my father abused me, or we can go down a list of the abuse, but they were abused before.
Yeah.
And then when you talk to the men too,
Yeah.
boys, men, it's the same thing. I would say hardly ever you're coming from a place where they come from loving homes and
Yeah.
now they're just be
Yeah.
abusing people. I mean, there are some cases like that, but they're very far and few
Right.
between.
Right. Yeah. You're right. You're right. The stats actually support what you're saying. The stats
Yeah.
support what you're saying. Okay. All right. So come back to that other point about, because in our culture there's all these sayings that we hold up as, oh, it's such a romantic, the most amazing thing this other person has said or can be to me in relation to me, where people say things like, you complete me. And I want you to be that person in my life who completes me. Like, what's up with that? Like, where are people coming from when they think from that that when they're thinking that, and like, why is that actually a problem?
Um, Jerry Maguire. Um,
Okay.
we watch these movies
Yeah.
and we romanticize relationships too.
Yes.
And this is the other, like you had me at hello, right? Or, different, you know, I can go into a whole laundry list of things. Like When Harry Met Sally is one of my favorite films of all time. Love
Uh-huh.
that film. And I can watch it. I can watch it again and again and again, right?
Yeah.
But I also now have grown up going, not everything is like When Harry Met Sally. I'm not going to have the guy running to a New Year's Eve party to get there by midnight for him to tell me this whole, paragraph of why he wants to be with me.
Mhm.
And I think we romanticize things thinking that this is the way it's supposed to be. But real relationships, going into what we were talking about, is work.
Yes.
So real relationships, if there's someone you want to be with, you have to have the same commonalities. I mean, you can be different. I just had this conversation with someone the other
Ah.
day. I so had this conversation a few days ago, and opposites do attract. Don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
but in there somewhere, in their commonalities, the big ones, they were common.
Yes.
It
Yes.
was always going to be that way. My mom and dad, perfect example. My mom loves to be the traveler. She very outspoken. My dad's, a quiet dude, doesn't like to travel, doesn't, she travels all over the place. He stays home. They have a great marriage. They love each other
Yeah.
and they're friends, like
Mhm.
ride or die with each other. But they're definitely opposites there. But you know what? Their commonalities of how they wanted their family to be and how they wanted their relationship to be
Mm.
was the same.
Ah, such a great example. And you made me think of my parents that are a great example of this as well. My parents are so different from each other in so many different ways. For example, I think one of the biggest differences that I feel in my relationship with my parents is that my dad is more like me in the sense that, we are very intellectual and philosophical and we are nerdy and geeky. We love to learn and do lots of
That's awesome.
research about everything and we'll take a deep dive. Like a few days ago, it so happened that we had to get rid of my bed and get a new bed, new mattress, everything. I spent 2 days researching in detail all the different kinds of variations in mattresses and mattress technology, and then different kinds of bed frames and bed foundations and what bed frame and foundation will match what mattress the best. And I did this whole research and then I came to a conclusion and I followed through on what I found based on my research. Now my mom, that kind of thing is just not her thing.
She sees it. She's like, I want that.
Uh, that, but also if if we try to make her go through that kind of process, it gives her a headache, and it's just not her thing, you know. So that's just one big difference between them. And then there's lots of other little big differences between them, but the glue of their relationship is what's common between them. And that's their core values for,
Yeah.
loving family, prioritizing family, and their concept of what that means, what family is and how to be a family. Like that is so much in common. They have their faith in common, as
Mm-hmm.
both practicing Muslims, and not only are they both practicing Muslims, but their idea of what it means to be a Muslim actually matches to a very great degree, because not all Muslims think the same about how to be Muslim.
Yeah.
So, and that's like also another big thing that I love talking to Muslims about, because especially for Muslims who are committed to their Muslim identity, sometimes you're like, okay, I'm going to marry another Muslim and that's it. And so, do you identify as a Muslim? And then oftentimes people want to dig deeper into, well, how do you actually interpret the teachings of Islam and living Islam? Because my gosh, we have seriously, like, we have the full spectrum from very traditional conservative attitudes and ideologies to very, very liberal progressive ones. And, like they don't get along
Yeah.
or it's very hard for them to get along. And so
Oh,
just
yeah.
imagine like getting into a marriage where you haven't verified that your Muslim ideals or ideas of being Muslim match.
And that, I mean, I love that you said that because just because you're inside the same religion doesn't mean that you have the same values.
Right.
Yes, it's a very, very true. And these are things you should always talk about with your partner before going
Yeah.
into a more in-depth relationship,
Mm,
whether it be marriage or long-term relationship. But anything that's going to put you with years into a relationship, these
yeah.
are things that need to be talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give me some more examples of things that couples should for sure talk about?
Oh my goodness. How they're going to raise their children.
Oh,
Number one is, I think to me, that is something you need to talk about. How are you going to raise your children? You know, how do you see your life in together? Like, how are you going to raise your children? How do you see your life together? Where are you going to live? That's a huge one. Where are you going to live? Finances. Finances are huge. You need to talk about how are you going to do your finances?
mhm.
How do you see each other going into this marriage? And how do you see each other 5 years from now, in 10 years from now? How do you see yourselves together?
Yes.
And these conversations have to happen before you get married,
Mm,
because a lot of people who get married for the dress, as I say. They
yeah.
get married for the dress and the party.
Yeah.
And I do ask people who are getting married, so have you guys had the conversation?
Hmm.
And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, have you talked about all of the things I just mentioned?
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, but we've been together long enough to know. No, 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 no. There is this thing in, I don't know if you have it in the Muslim religion, and I'm sure you do, because there's so many similarities in all the religions.
Uh-huh.
And but in the Catholicism, there is a thing called pre-Cana. So pre-Cana is basically before two people get married,
Uh-huh.
they sit down with a counselor. A lot of times
Ah, mhm.
it's a priest or someone within, normally within the church. There's one in New Jersey that's known for, like, the one of the best, because they say 50% of the couples that go to this weekend retreat walk out of there not getting married.
Ah, mhm.
But to
Yeah.
me, I was like, that's amazing, because you want to know why?
Yeah.
It might, if they would have spent more years together,
Yes.
that's less years of not being with the person that you're really supposed to be with.
That's right. That's right. And not to mention if you get married and then you get divorced or it comes down to that,
Yeah.
it's a much more complicated and oftentimes traumatic process to go through.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I believe that everyone who is going into a serious relationship, whether it be marriage or long term, at some point should see someone to
Yeah.
see where they are together. Sometimes you need a mediator. Sometimes you need someone to point certain things out. Sometimes you need someone just to be there so you feel comfortable to have those conversations.
Yes.
Even though you should be comfortable enough to have those conversations,
Yes.
you should have, I think it's good to have those conversations with someone.
Yes, I agree with you. And the thing is that in our traditional culture, it was interestingly not the couples, the prospective bride and groom that had the conversations. But what happened, and even today actually, if you're living like, practicing the traditional aspect of the culture in India and Pakistan, and we have arranged marriages, what happens is that the families are meant to actually go through that process, rather than just the prospective bride and groom. So the families are supposed to meet, and the elders in the family are supposed to guide the process of, talking about all of these things. And, you know, oftentimes that's when a lot of, ugliness comes out, but it's a good thing that it comes out, because then, oh my gosh, it's
Yeah.
like, because otherwise, oh my gosh, you would have gone in blind. And
Yeah.
so at least now you know what the problems are and how you want to respond. Like just literally yesterday, I was watching an Indian movie where this exact scene happened, where they were having this conversation about, like, the bride and the groom, actually prospective bride and groom, liked each other. They were interested in each other. but they never did the financial part of the conversation. Then the families got into the financial part of the conversation, and all kinds of ugliness came out. And then, and this was like a cool thing, the bride actually empowered herself, and she was like, okay, now I have this information, and now I know um, what to consider as I think about what I want my future to be like, and
Yeah.
if I want to even be in this relationship. And I was so proud of the heroine for taking that stance, because oftentimes, in these depictions, the heroine in this case, like they wouldn't have had her speak up in this way, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, it's, but yeah, it's so important. I mean, especially going into these important unions, you
Yeah.
have to have these
Yeah.
conversations. And also what it also shows you is how you really do communicate in a
Yeah.
relationship.
Mm,
That you should never be afraid to have your voice in a relationship.
yes.
Never you if you're afraid to have your voice in that particular relationship, then
Yeah.
I think that that's not the relationship you should be in.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
in a relationship you should be equals.
Mm,
Equals in the sense of, like, of course we're all going to have different roles.
right.
That's not what I'm talking about, but what
Yes.
equals when it comes to your voice.
Right. Like the power balance should be there. There shouldn't be a
Yes.
huge power imbalance where one person is afraid of the other person, where one person feels like I have to do what the other person wants.
Yes.
Otherwise, they'll be upset or they'll get angry, or our relationship will not be able to survive if I don't do what this other person says.
Yes, because guess what? That relationship's not going to survive anyway. There's going to be something there.
Yeah.
If that's where you're at, there's going to be something else that's going to happen in that relationship that it won't survive.
Mm. At least not in a healthy state.
No, not in a healthy state. No, it would not. Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, that's not a healthy relationship too.
Yeah.
If you are afraid in any way. And
Yeah.
once again, I'm not saying it's abusive. That's not what I'm saying. Because some people can just be afraid to use their voice at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's nothing really abusive going on. They're just afraid to use
Yeah.
their voice
Yeah.
because but you should always be powerful enough to say what's on your mind and to be able to communicate right. Because
That's
there's some people
yeah.
who they just tell instead of talk.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
And I want to thank you for bringing up the point about that if there is this power imbalance, that it's not automatically an abusive relationship,
Yes.
because sometimes it's a matter of perception, where it's not that the other person would actually have a bad reaction to your speaking up,
Yeah.
but you have that fear. And I have seen this a lot actually also in the context of the way things work in my culture, because,
Mm-hmm.
again, the traditional aspect of my culture is patriarchal. And women are literally taught, like mothers will teach their daughters. I've actually heard my mother say this to me on I don't know how many occasions, and I've argued with her on this point, but I've actually had her say to me, she says things like, she's like, in a marriage, you have to be ready to take on the responsibility, the primary responsibility to make the relationship work. Because her logic is as follows, that women are just smarter about relationships, and they have more patience, and they have more compassion, and so they have to take on the greater responsibility to make relationships work. Men, I mean, most women in our culture have loving disrespect for the men in their in their
Yeah.
lives. And so they don't believe that the men in their lives have the capacity to be mature enough to be able to like respond in the best ways to conflict in different kinds of situation or to disagreement and this and that. And I'm like, okay, but if it is like that, that's all learned behavior,
Yes.
both on the part of the men and the women. And I'm not willing to be like that. So if I ever get married, which I'm totally not interested in right now, but if I was ever to get married, it will be to a man who is, mature enough and wise enough and open enough to having this more equal kind of a relationship where I
Yes.
don't have to take the greater responsibility of making the relationship work.
But your mom is right. We are smarter.
That part I mostly agree with.
Yeah, we are. Let's be honest. But it's okay because it is being in a relationship where your partner is also willing to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Your partner wants to be there. Your partner is up for caring for you. Your partner is, it's not one way because you can teach, and like your partner can teach you things too. That's the other thing.
That's
Your
right.
partner, yeah, your partner should, you two should always be learning from each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing. You should also, in relationships, um, have each other's back.
Mm,
You
yes.
need to be a team.
Mm, yeah.
Even if, let's say, you might not agree all the time, because you're not going to agree all the time in a relationship. But if your partner, is there something that they want to do and you have their back and you believe in them, there is nothing better in any relationship than your partner believing in you 100%.
Yeah. Ah,
Yes.
yeah. That is amazing. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And oh man, we are at a time where I want to keep talking with you and we have to wrap up for the day. And I'm just sorry because I'm just having so much fun and we'll
Oh,
just
this is a
have to bring you
blast.
back for sure.
Oh, yes, I'll come back. Let me know.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's do that. Let's make it happen. So for right now, do you have any last words of wisdom or anything else that you would like to say?
Yeah. What I'm gonna say, make sure when you get into a relationship, it's for the right reasons, and make sure it's because you're ready
Yeah.
and you love yourself, so you can go in and love someone else correctly. As long as you can love yourself correctly, you can love someone else correctly.
Yeah. Oh, amazing.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
Awesome. So to all of our dear listeners, please make sure you check the show notes because we're going to be adding both of our links in the show notes. You can connect with us if and when you're ready for help and support. And in the meantime, I just wish you lots and lots of peace and joy.